Welcome to the Storytelling with Data podcast, where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Alex.
One day after school, my daughter pulled out a self-portrait that she painted in art class. I gushed, "Wow, that's so creative." Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and she asked, "What's your favorite part?" Taking a moment to consider, I replied, "I really love the way you use different colors for the shadows. It makes the piece look unique." To my surprise, she asked, "You haven't seen that before?" I paused. I had seen it before, but not from her. She'd discovered this technique herself through her own exploration. If I told her that I had seen it before, would she make the mistake of discounting her artwork as not creative? I know that I've done that to myself 1,000 times. I've taken away my creative credit once I discovered that it had been done before. So that's what we're going to talk about today: creativity in the data visualization space and how we all have creative ideas within us. We just need to learn to care for them, to coax them out, and then to communicate them effectively to our peers. Now, that's according to Alli Torban, who I'm very excited to have on the podcast today. And actually, the story that I just shared with all of you is not a story of my own. In fact, if you know me, you're probably incredibly surprised because I do not have a daughter. That is Alli Torban's daughter that she is referring to. And this is excerpt from her brand new book, ChartSpark. Hi, Alli, and welcome to the Storytelling with Data podcast.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I've been following you for a while, Alli. You may not know that, but I was thinking back to it maybe 2018, 2019. I've always sort of kept track of the work that you've been doing. And I was looking into what you've been up to recently, and you must be busy. You have your podcast. You're almost at your 100th episode, I think.
Yeah, we're getting
right?
close to 100. You're right.
Wow. You have a consulting company. You started a learning community in data visualization. You work for data literacy as a data literacy advocate. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
And now you have published a book.
Yes, my first book, my first baby book.
I love it. So can you talk us through what was your journey to this point? How did you get started in data visualization? You couldn't have just woken up one day and said, "I want a podcast, I want a book in this space." How did we get here?
Yeah, I am certainly not the kind of person that anyone would have guessed to have a podcast because I am very introverted, never want any kind of attention on me. My husband used to joke that because we would go to Subway together, I don't know, this was 10 or 15 years ago, and I wouldn't even be able to raise my voice loud enough to order the sandwich. They'd always be like, "Say that again, say that again." I would not have been someone that would have been picked out to do a podcast. But rewinding a little bit, I was a math major, and after I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kind of just went with whatever first job was offered to me when I graduated, which was a software tester, business systems analyst type job in the DC area for government clients. So I was working on site at the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, and I was doing pretty cool data analyst work, running a lot of SQL queries. You know, it wasn't glamorous, but it felt like I was doing something important. But it always felt like there was a little bit of something missing. And so I went back to school and I got a graduate certificate in geospatial intelligence because I thought I like maps. If I could kind of layer mapping on top of this data analyst job, that might kind of scratch whatever this itch is that I have. And I did apply to some jobs and I got offered a job, but then I found out I was pregnant. And here in the US, companies don't guarantee you FMLA if you haven't been there for a full year. So like, well, I'm definitely not going to change jobs right now. So I stayed at that job part-time while I had my first daughter. And then I stopped working completely when I had my second daughter 2 years later. And I thought, okay, perfect. I'm going to like do the baby thing and figure out the baby thing. And at the same time, I'll see if I can also figure out where I want to go with my career when I start working again. So I started exploring things I could do from home that also leaned on my data background. So I was doing some freelance data journalism. I wrote a few articles for some local magazines. And I realized there's a thing called data visualization. This is pretty cool. It's kind of like the mix of the data stuff plus some of the visual stuff. Of course, it includes maps. And I had no idea how to get a job doing it since I had no experience. But I thought, okay, well, I have to have a portfolio if I want to apply for jobs. So I will listen to podcasts and learn how to create visualizations, what softwares they're using, so I can create enough so I can have a portfolio. So I listen to Storytelling with Data, Policy Vids podcast, Data Stories, and that was great. But as you probably know, you can only do so much with listening. You have to start applying stuff yourself. And I felt stuck there. My work just looked awful. I didn't know what topics to visualize. It's just hard to get started. But then I had the idea, maybe I could start a podcast and I could ask my guests anything that I wanted to help me move forward with this. So I started my podcast, Data Viz Today, in 2018. And with every episode, I would create a visualization inspired by the person that I interviewed. And that is what propelled me to have enough of a portfolio where I could start applying for jobs. I got a data viz designer job like 9 months later. And 3 years after that, I started my own consultancy, so doing freelance data visualization design, and then started with data literacy as a data literacy trainer, senior data literacy advocate. And then they were gracious enough to publish my first book, ChartSpark, about creativity in data communication, because I felt like I went through a pretty big journey just being kind of a SQL query writer all day long to someone who creates data comics, illustrations, creative infographics. I felt like I had went through quite the journey. So I wanted to share that.
You have, absolutely.
Yeah, all the things I've learned.
So you've said that ChartSpark is about creativity. You talked about how some of the challenges that you faced early on were just with a block and not knowing where to start. Is that where the inspiration for ChartSpark came? Is that you didn't want others to, I guess, not have the spark? So have a system to be able to move forward?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we have such a high bar of what creativity, especially in the data world, what that should look like. Like we should all be winning the Information is Beautiful awards and having these beautiful data art graphics, but it's not like that. Most people aren't doing data art. Data art's cool, but it's not what we're usually doing day to day. But you can be creative in little ways without feeling like you have to win some kind of award in order to call yourself creative. You can do it in really small acts, like learning a new tool is actually creative. Learning how to put a bar chart with a map that filter at the same time on your dashboard. Yeah, that's useful to other people. So really just creativity is remixing things, current things that you have seen, or remixing, or
just like a new idea.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, just some sort of new idea where you can solve a problem in a different way. So anybody can do it. And I didn't want people to think that because they weren't creating beautiful data art, they weren't creative.
I love this definition because when I think of the word creativity, I think of art, whether data is involved or not. So maybe it's a potter or a painter and there's some interesting shape and texture going on. And if I apply that to data visualization, my immediate thought goes to what you said, data art, right? Something coming out of the pudding, if you will, which I'm never going to create. And when I think about the work that I do, I typically create bar charts and line charts in Excel. So for me, that doesn't sound very creative. So your definition is just so much more inclusive and motivating, I think, for the standard data professional.
Yeah, it just has to be something that's slightly different that you would do, and it's useful to other people. Like I have an example in the book where I created a line chart showing how the prices of avocados changed over time. And there was 2 lines, one for organic avocados and one for conventional, non-organic avocados. And that's something that anybody would probably create. But I thought, let's find a different angle for the same data and make it a little bit more creative, something different, more useful. And so what I did is I used one of the prompts in my book and I found a slightly different angle, thinking like, why would this data be interesting to someone at this particular time? Like, what's the conflict? What's the timeliness? What's the resolution? And it helped me change how I viewed the chart. Instead of just the difference between the avocado prices over time, we're thinking about it like, hey, now is the time to make that guacamole because avocado prices for organic avocados is the lowest that it's ever been. So this is the time to do it. So really you can create a creative graphic just by changing the title and maybe like highlighting something that you didn't highlight before.
Incredibly valuable because anyone can do that. I will just comment that avocados are not cheap at any point in time.
Yes. So you want to know when's the good time.
100%. So coming back to your book, you've talked about prompts that you share. And when I read your book, by the way, I really enjoyed it. I liked that it was divided into 3 very practical sections. So the first section is all about caring for your own creativity. The second section is about coaxing those ideas out of your brain, putting them in the real world. And then finally, being able to communicate that creativity to peers or to clients. So I want to come back to this idea of caring for your creativity, because when I first read it, it felt a little abstract. So what does that mean? And why is it an important step for data professionals to take?
Yeah, it can sound a little squishy and woo-woo when you first hear like caring for my creativity. What does that even mean?
I like that.
But I break it down into a few different parts. One of them is just cultivating your openness, because some people are like, I just never have any good ideas. Like, you probably have a lot of good ideas. You probably just shut it down before you even give it a second to grow. I use the metaphor tulips in the book. Like, before your tulips have even had a chance to blossom, you're just like cutting them down, you're mowing them down. So sometimes you have to let an idea be just for a minute, a day, and just see if it germinates into something or combines with something else in your mind or that someone else talks about so that it can become a good idea. So thinking about cultivating your openness. And then the other part of caring for your creativity is really collecting inspiration in a very well-rounded and proactive way. So a lot of times we think of inspiration as something that's just going to strike you when you need it. But actually, you really need to be actively cultivating it and collecting it. So I use the story in the book about how in my yard in Virginia, we have a really beautiful walnut tree in the front yard. And I am just constantly seeing all the squirrels run around and grabbing up the walnuts when they fall. And then, of course, in the winter, I'm seeing all these holes in the yard where the squirrels go and pick them up. And it reminded me of how we should be collecting our inspiration, just year round, be collecting it so that when you start that project, you have inspiration to draw from. Otherwise, you're just going to be like sitting around passively hoping to be inspired by something. You don't have to be passive. You can be active doing it. And one of the prompts that I have in the book is around collecting inspiration, if you want to chat about that for a second.
Yeah, I think it's a really creative and systemized way of collecting inspiration, but also making it practical so that you can search for it later and use it in your day job. So what is that concept that you're referring to? And can you talk us through it?
Yeah, it's called X-ray. So it's an acronym. And I say, okay, if you see a graphic that you like, it strikes you in a particular way, then X-ray it. And X stands for excited. So what initially got you excited about this graphic? And it can be anything. It can be the colors. It can be the topic. And then R is rules. How is it following data visualization best practices? So maybe it has a really nice axis or the annotations are just, perfect. And then A is anarchy. So how did they just like throw out the rules? And you don't have to agree with how they showed their anarchy. We're not passing judgment. You're really just taking note. How did they perform anarchy with this graphic? And then last one is why you. How could you apply any of these things that you learned to your work in the future? And I feel like this one is probably the most useful because you're actually going through the exercise of thinking, what's a future scenario that I might be in where this particular thing that I saw would be useful? And in doing that, it kind of solidifies it in your memory a little bit better. And you can also keep all of this in a spreadsheet and have all your x-rays in a nice spreadsheet. So when you're thinking, I need to show like proportions changing over time and it has to be eye-catching, you can just do a control F of those keywords in your x-ray spreadsheet and then see like how other people have done it. And maybe you wrote that down. Maybe you wrote the word proportion in one of your x-rays and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. That is a good way to do it. So if you see a good graphic, don't just bookmark it and let it just collect dust in your bookmark folder. Just x-ray it and put it in a spreadsheet and you can use it for later.
I love this. That's what I do. Unfortunately, I have so many bookmarked things that I will never search through, that will never see the light of day. So it's nice to go beyond this is inspiring, think about the why, and then put it in a format that you can use it later. So I'm curious, how big is your spreadsheet? Your x-ray spreadsheet?
Yeah, the funny thing is that like half of them are in the spreadsheet and like half of them are in like 3x5 cards in a box, because that's how I was doing it until I had the idea of the spreadsheet. So nice. I haven't transferred them over. And so, I mean, that's a good point, is that your system doesn't have to be perfect. Anything that you do beyond just looking at it and forgetting it immediately is going to be helping you in the future. That's a way for you to be collecting those walnuts so that you're not starving in the winter.
I love it. Are you willing for me to put you on the spot a little bit and maybe we do an x-ray with an example?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so I recognize folks are listening in. We don't have a visual in front of us. So I thought it would be useful if we pick an example that most people have probably seen. And the most familiar example that comes to mind for me is Flatten the Curve, that came out, or was popularized, I should say, around the beginnings of the coronavirus epidemic. Right. So if you are listening and you don't have it envisioned in your head, this is a graph that probably circulated for years prior to 2020. It was made popular by Drew Harris. It's an area curve. I believe Drew changed the colors of the area to blue and to red. And under each area, it represents the number of COVID-19 cases that would happen with or without precautions being taken. And Drew added in this dashed line that shows the maximum capacity for what a healthcare system could take. So I'm curious, just on the spot, what's your x-ray of that area curve, Alli?
Yeah, I just pulled it up so I could be looking at it. So the X for excited. I mean, the thing is that with COVID, from what we all vividly remember, is that we were all feeling kind of like desperate to reduce that counting number that's going up, right? So in the chart with the flattening the curve, there's a curve that's like really high, and then there's a curve that's kind of like more subdued. And with that line on top of it, that was showing, I think it was like healthcare capacity. It was trying to make sure we didn't go over the healthcare capacity. Yes. So that second curve feels like it's kind of getting pushed down, and it's in blue. So it kind of feels like this is the calm part of how COVID could be calmer as
possible.
Yeah, as calm as possible compared to this like red, large curve that we see on the other side. So I think the thing that got me excited about it when I first saw it back in the day is that it feels like, hey, this is a good, calm option. Like this feels like where we want to be. So I think the color and the placement, how that curve is getting kind of like pushed down by the annotated line is really helpful.
Awesome. What would the R be? So this is the rules, right?
Yes, rules. So the labels are really great. So the y-axis, x-axis are labeled nicely. We have number of cases on the y-axis, time since first case on the x-axis. Both curves are clearly labeled within the curve, so there's no question. And then the annotated line is dashed. So it's very clear, like this isn't an axis or anything with a label. So I feel like labeling is just completely on point in this graphic.
Fantastic. And then we have A, so the anarchy. Was anything thrown out the window when it comes to rules with this one?
This one is interesting because it is a very simple graphic. So it's like, well, where is the anarchy? But what kind of strikes me as anarchy is this was probably pulled from some actual chart, some actual research of somebody who probably is doing the real COVID cases versus some sort of projected model or something it probably has tons of data on it. And if you've ever worked with researchers or academics, you taking a graphic and completely stripping all the data off of it, like all
Hard
the actual
no.
real numbers. Yes, hard no. I feel like the anarchy here is that they stripped out the things that would just really be distracting to your average reader. You know, people who, this is in the New York Times and lots of other places, it was on the news. So they stripped out a lot of things that would be distracting to a general audience, much to the chagrin of academics, I'm sure, and researchers. But I think it really worked here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not precise at all. It's more conceptual. And typically that doesn't work. People want the data. They want the hard numbers behind it.
Yeah.
All right. So the why, how do you foresee using a graph like this or the design aspects in your work?
I think the anarchy part here is the most useful for me. So just thinking about if you do have a chart that is really full of data, but you are trying to convey it to a more general audience, is there a way that you can simplify it, even almost oversimplify it, if the message still gets across, so that people won't get lost in the details? So almost turning a graphic, a chart into a conceptual diagram. That's a really interesting thing to have in your back pocket. That you could
You're
use.
almost visualizing a metaphor, I guess, or a
Yeah.
concept for someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that could be quite helpful for a lot of people, especially when they're explaining a process at work or something of that nature to a less data-driven audience.
Yeah, exactly.
I really appreciate all of these prompts, these thought exercises that you have in your book, and I want to talk more about some of the ones that I think will be useful for folks. But before we do that, let's take a quick break.
Hello, podcast listeners. We've got an upcoming session that you won't want to miss. Join us on Thursday, June 20th, 2024 at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live interactive mini workshop called Explore and Explain. Join Cole and data storyteller and two-time Tableau visionary Mike Cisneros as they take you on a guided journey through the full process of turning exploratory analysis into a concise and easy-to-understand presentation. You'll learn how to explain the critical insights you've discovered and motivate your audience to take action. You must register for this event. Our last event had over 10,000 people register. Visit storytellingwithdata.com/explore-explain to register for this mini workshop where your questions can be answered live. Remember, that's June 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live interactive mini workshop. Explore and explain. And the best part? It's totally free.
And we are back. So, Alli, we have talked a lot about what creativity is. We've talked about the process that ideas take a little bit of time to develop, and we shouldn't just immediately critique them. We have to let them grow. We've also talked about the importance of maintaining a list of inspiration because ideas don't come out one after one after one. We're not machines, so we need to have inspiration to look at to help us generate ideas. That's external inspiration. I want to shift now to how do we find internal inspiration when it comes to data visualization? In your book, you have a couple of prompts that you rely on anytime you're facing some sort of mental block. Can you take us through what is your favorite prompt that you use whenever you're not sure maybe how to approach a project or getting more specific, not sure which chart type to use?
Yeah, one of the parts of inspiration, I know at the beginning we talked about, I said how I think about inspiration in a couple different ways. And we mentioned practical inspiration. That's what the X-ray prompt, we're really X-raying inspiration that is specific to other data visualizations. And also, I think having time to rest is so important to caring for your creativity and giving yourself time to make connections that you already have in your head. So you have all the dots and you just need time to connect them. And this is a type of inspiration that most people just forget about or just they know about but don't think it works, so they're not going to do it. But I have found so many breakthroughs happen when I'm taking a shower, going for a walk, unloading the dishwasher. You know, I use the metaphor as like a sponge. When you are doing dishes, you're just constantly squeezing out the sponge because when it gets too full of water, it's hard for you to clean the dishes really well. So every once in a while, you got to be squeezing out your sponge so you can be more effective. I think the same thing applies to resting when you're working on a problem. Every once in a while, you got to squeeze out the sponge, give your brain a chance to relax and or make those connections for you. So one of my favorite things to do is just take a break, which I know sounds really easy and maybe a cop out, but taking a break and finding a way to take a break, even if I only have a minute, going and getting a cup of tea or coffee or walking across the street and grabbing my mail. Just little things like that can help move my ideas forward.
And it sounds like when you're taking a break, you're taking a physical break from the actual work, but also mental break. And I think it's that mental space that you create that allows those ideas and those connections to come through.
Yeah, I think so. And, like doing little things like there is one of my favorite exercises to do when I am stuck is called break the box prompt. And I'll just write the idea that I am struggling with in the middle of a box on a piece of paper. And then on each side of the box, I will write one particular aspect of this project that I'm working on. And then for each one of those aspects, I'll just write the opposite of that thing. So one example I use in the book is that I had to create a graphic that visualized some sort of life cycle. So the original graphic was just a circle, like with four steps, and they're all kind of pointing towards each other, right? So it's like your basic life cycle. I'm like, how in the world am I going to create something that's interesting? This was for the newspaper Axios, and I was trying to think of something creative. You want people to read the article about this media manipulation life cycle. So what I did was I wrote life cycle in the center, and then the assumptions of what you would think a typical life cycle would look like circular, repeating. And then I just wrote the opposite of that. Okay, what if it's not circular? What if it's in a line? What if it's not repeating? Like those things like that just help you immediately see your project through a new lens. And every time I do it, I think of a new question to ask or a new avenue to go down. So thinking about opposites is also a good way to get yourself unblocked.
And is the important part of that you're not censoring any ideas and you're doing it quickly? So you just name the opposite of whatever you put down on the paper?
Yes, exactly. So I actually time myself. I set a timer for 2 minutes to do it. And I have found that to be the perfect time because it gives you enough time to actually physically write it, but it's so fast that you can barely even think about it. You can also use like ChatGPT or something to help you. Like, what's the opposite of a straight line? What's the opposite of something that's circular? And it'll give you some ideas. So if you can't do it yourself or just want an extra brainstorming partner, you can use AI too.
I was just going to ask, have you ever done any of these prompts in a team setting?
Oh, yeah. And it works 1,000 times better. I mean, sometimes you don't have the luxury of having your teammates around, or maybe you don't have any teammates. Maybe you're a soloist, or like I'm sure a lot of people listening in the case, you're the only data viz person on your team. So it's like, well, I don't really have anybody who I can talk to about my project. But something like this where I'm going to write down a bunch of attributes. You tell me what you think the opposite of that is. That's something you can do with anybody. So yes, definitely do it with people if you can.
And then you can pressure test, is A or is B a better idea for moving forward?
Right.
Yeah, it's a great way to get the discussion going when you're trying to brainstorm how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I like about that particular prompt is that it's quick. You can get it done even when you don't have a lot of time. But one of the things I struggled with, especially when I was working as a data analyst, is that to be creative, you need time, right? Time to let those ideas really grow. And oftentimes it just felt like the traditional corporate setting isn't designed to allow people to be creative. It values quantity more so than maybe the quality of creative ideas.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for folks that are trying to strike the right balance between being creative, but also having to just churn out report after report?
Yes. Yeah, one helpful thing for me, I mean, sure, you can try to change the structure of the workplace, but good luck.
Yeah, I had to leave.
Yes, exactly. You're probably fighting a losing battle, but feel free to try. Other than that, you can think about the times where you feel the most creative and just try to structure your tasks as much as possible. I have found the times that I'm most creative are the times where I'm the least critical of my ideas. And I just feel like I have the most openness to the ideas that I'm having, so I'm not trimming those tulips. So what are those times for you where you feel like you are the most open to ideas, you are willing to wrestle with a problem for a little bit longer? I know for me, that's in the morning, like my analytical critic is kind of more turned down. In the afternoon, I do better with execution tasks where I am just be like, okay, I got to create this chart. I got to write this script. I got to just, execute. So I save that for the afternoon as much as I can. I mean, I live in the real world. I know there are deadlines and sometimes you have to be working on the execution stuff in the morning. But as much as I can, I try to do those creative tasks at a time where my critic is turned down, and I do the execution tasks at a time where the critic is turned up, because that's when it's the most valuable and you can just like turn off the creative brain and just execute and you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, I would just try to tune into your internal rhythms if you don't have power over the external work rhythms.
Sure. And I imagine some of the ideas that you shared already play into this. The fact that if you want to be creative, you don't have to go from 0 to 100. Sometimes it can be as simple as just finding a different chart title or a different color that you use, or some of these time boxing prompts that you have can also be helpful.
Yeah.
One question I have around creativity and communicating it to others is that oftentimes when you come up with a unique idea, you're proud of it, you're really excited, but then you have to sell it to somebody else. And it is absolutely so demotivating when you pitch that idea and somebody is not bought in. So how do you approach that when you come up with a creative idea and you're nervous? Is there something you do to sell it a little bit better? Have you learned how to take feedback better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is really hard. And I have found preparing ahead of time is the best way you can make sure your creative ideas see the light of day. So what do I mean by that? It's that your creative idea kind of has to match the situation. So I had this one project where I thought I was creating the most creative graphic in the entire world. It was like this, it was survey results for different JavaScript flavors. And I created a tessellated unit chart. So it's like this tessellation of all these ice cream flavors, and they were just kind of like it was like the most creative thing in the world. But then I sent it over to my client and they were like, no, this isn't even close to what we were expecting. And it was because I didn't really match my process, the level of my creative ideas to the client. So the things that I'm thinking about and talking to my client about before I'm even creating anything is how much time or patience does the reader of the graphic have? So if it's something quick, I mean, then they're not going to have a lot of time to be looking through this novel tessellated unit chart thing that I created, right?
Sure.
So maybe I need to go towards like more basic bar line charts. How important is it to them to capture attention? Maybe they're not looking to capture attention. Maybe this graphic is going in a dashboard that the analysts are looking at every day, all day. So who really cares if it's capturing their attention? Like, you don't have to do something novel for that. Have there been any struggles conveying this concept in the past? If everybody just gets it, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? We're not trying to spend extra resources creating something novel here. And then the last one is, how much time do I, as the designer, have? Because if I don't have a lot of time to work on something and experiment, because we talked about how you need to have time to experiment, you have to let those ideas grow. If I don't have time to experiment and test, then I'm not going to be messing with anything that's new or novel. I'm going to go with what works. So I'm thinking of those 4 questions, and I'm in my mind rating them from like high to low, and then like averaging them out and just thinking, okay, is this a good time to just try something new, or should I just go with what works? So orienting myself in that way with my client as much as I can will help me so that when I am presenting an idea, we're both on the same page. And then also when you're presenting the idea, you always want to focus in on how it is contributing to the goal of the project. Because if you just say, here's this wild thing that I dreamed up, you're like, where in the world did this come from? But if you've thought about the decisions that you made, I chose this because of this, I'm using this visual metaphor because of that, then it does make it much, much easier for you to sell your idea and more likely that it'll be accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to articulate why is it useful for somebody else. And we can't just expect the person on the receiving end to immediately figure that out on their own.
Exactly.
And the only way you can articulate the usefulness is by having that context that you talked about, really understanding how much time you have, has it worked in the past,
Yep.
what is the reader expecting, and so forth. These are incredibly valuable questions that I think we should all be asking, whether working with an external client or internal even.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other final wisdom or advice that you would give for the general data practitioner who's looking to be a little bit more creative?
I would say to think of it as a journey. And it's not something, a switch you can just flip on and be like, I'm creative now. I mean, you can think of yourself as creative. I encourage everyone to say that they're creative because you are naturally creative. But think of it more like you are going to be taking small steps to cultivate your creativity, care for it, how we talked about taking breaks, collecting inspiration, practicing being more open, making it more of like a lifestyle and giving yourself time and space to think of creative ideas and let them build on each other. I talk in the book how there was this research by Coffin and Beghetto, and they defined creativity in 4 different ways. You have the mini C creative acts. So that's when you're just learning how to do something. So you learn how to create a chart in Tableau. You are being creative. And then there's little c creativity. That's something where you are doing little experiments yourself. And that is something where maybe you are connecting the bar chart to the map, like we talked about at the beginning. Like that's little c creativity. Maybe it's useful to someone else. It's useful to you. And then there's pro c creativity. That's when maybe you bring that bar chart and the map plus a line chart and something else, a scatter plot, and you put it in a dashboard, and now your whole team is using this dashboard at work. That's pro C for professional creativity. It's useful to other people. And then there's big C creativity. That's like Einstein level, change the world, lasting
Create
creativity.
a new graph.
Yes, and that's great. And you can aspire to that if you want, but don't expect that of yourself. That's not what we are reaching for. I think you can have a really fulfilling career, a fulfilling creative practice, if you are just doing these little creative acts and building them on each other. You'll feel very fulfilled doing that.
Absolutely. And that's much more achievable. And when you see progress there, it's going to motivate you further and further to keep trying to be even more creative.
Yep, exactly.
You've shared so many exercises, thought prompts with all of us. I thought we would give listeners one more taste of some of the exercises that you share in the book.
Oh, great.
And I wanted to end our conversation here today with a rapid fire round of what you call bad gifts. And I'm going to make this into a data visualization edition. So before I share what my gifts are, can you talk us through what is bad gifts? Why is it important?
Bad gifts is an improv game that I learned from one of my friends, Michelle Hellman, and she was explaining it to me that they do it as a warm-up in her improv class. And what it is that you give someone a gift just verbally, and it's supposed to be a bad gift. So like a wet sock from behind the washing machine, like something nobody wants. But you have to think of a reason on why it's the exact perfect thing that you wanted. And you can be as wild as you want in your gifts and in your acceptances, because it's really about practicing an open mindset. So it doesn't have to be the perfect answer. It just has to be an answer that is acceptable to you in the moment. So it's just really a exercise to make you feel like you are practicing your openness muscle.
And when you have that openness muscle is the benefit that then when you think of ideas, you're less likely to trim your
Yes.
tulips, if you will.
Yes, exactly. You are practicing that openness mindset so that you don't just automatically think that whatever idea you had was bad. So like whenever I use that wet sock example, everyone's like, ugh. But
That was my face.
If that is your initial response, then there is a way to train yourself out of those initial thought patterns so that you're not in them when you do think of off-the-wall ideas.
And why would somebody want a wet sock? Just curious.
Well, in the book, I said my acceptance was that you can use it to cool yourself off when you're hot after a workout because it's wet.
That is so gross. On that note, let's jump to the data visualization edition, and I'll try and be more open-minded. So I'm going to give you what I would consider to be a bad graph, and I guess you're going to practice being open to it.
Mm-hmm.
So my first gift to you, and I think this one is going to be challenging, is a 3D pie chart that is exploding, has 12 different slices, all are a different color.
I love the 3D pie chart definitely as a meme. So I think this is perfect as a meme, but maybe we could even use a 3D printer to print it out and use it like as a paperweight. The 3D works there.
That was open. I like it. My second gift, and this will get under some people's skin, is a bar chart that does not start at 0. So anything else but 0.
I mean, I think that's a great teaching tool. I know that I guess you could say that for all the examples.
Appropriate as a data literacy advocate.
Yes, a good teaching tool. We do have that in our courses. I don't know. In my mind, I immediately thought of like, when you truncate the axes, it kind of starts sometimes making the bars look like stairs. So I was immediately thinking like, oh, this would be a cute cartoon where you could have like the little person jumping up and down the stairs. So you could turn it into a cute little comic.
There you go. And as a nod to your background in GIS, I thought my final bad graph would be a choropleth map that shows the total number of podcast listeners in the United States.
So,
is there anything to be happy about there?
Yeah, I think I guess the problem there would be that you would probably want some sort of normalized view of
not a total.
Yeah. Well, I think I would kindly accept that and thank you for the population map.
All right, that was a bit of a reach, but I like it. Alli, it has been awesome chatting with you about all of these incredibly helpful prompts. I'm excited to start my X-ray list. Where can people go to get ChartSpark?
Yes, you can go to chartsparkbook.com, and the book is in ebook, PDF, a paperback, and audiobook. So if you're listening to this and you like audio, it's in an audiobook, and it definitely works in audio because the book isn't full of graphics, more about the prompts and the thought process like you heard today. So I hope everybody gets it and enjoys it.
Fantastic. We'll be sure to link that in the show notes along with any of the visuals Alli mentioned earlier so that you can reference them and follow along with that X-ray technique. Thank you, Alli.
Thanks, Alex.